a veteran crypto reporter, Brady Dale, who's out with a new book, SBF, How the FTX Bankruptcy Unwound Crypto's Very Bad Good Guy. Brady, I have to tell you, I'm still suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome from the whole situation. And so I pride myself in reading everybody's books here on Open Book before I start these interviews. But in a moment of honesty, I had a tough time reading your book because it was so raw and visceral for me and so painful. But listen, you wrote a great book.
And the book wasn't painful, right? It was the experience that you're remembering, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was reliving how, and I was also, while I was reading your book, and I read most of it, to be totally candid, but what I was reading was making me relive, and then it was also making me question my judgment. And we're going to get into that as well, because I saw something in Sam that I frankly liked. I saw something in Sam that I thought was different. I thought he was I've said it before, I'll say it here on this podcast, I thought he was the Mark Zuckerberg or the potentially Elon Musk of crypto. I did not see him as the Bernie Madoff of crypto or the Charles Ponzi of crypto. And so I got that wrong. And so one of the calculations going on in my head is, how did I get that so wrong? And obviously many people got that wrong alongside of me. But let's go to your book. It's an amazing year. I'm going to set the scene for you. It's in your book. The View of Sam Bankman-Fried, May of 2022. What was that view of Sam Bankman-Fried, May 2022, one short year ago?
Well, so that would have been, if we go to mid-May, that's right after the Terra collapse. So just in case folks don't know, there was this stable coin called Terra that was, some thought it was this really daring approach to creating a unit of value on the internet. Others thought it was, a crazy kind of Ponzi scheme. And it had unwound in a way that everybody had always said it would unwound just a couple of weeks prior. And it turns out that a lot of big players were exposed to Terra. And so a lot of the cryptocurrency market was unwinding. And then, as that happened, it seemed like FTX was very nearly the last big man standing. And at least, Coinbase was still standing, that, Gemini was still standing at that point. They were okay. There were other big people standing, but it was the only one that started to step up and sort of save the entities that it thought in its wisdom at the time was worth saving. And so the crazy thing about Sam at that point is it looked like somehow, because by that point, you're 6 months into the peak of the crypto market coming off. Bitcoin had peaked November, 6 months before that. And everyone who knows crypto knows that after Bitcoin peaks, it's probably just going to go down for a while. It can all come back, but it's probably going to go down for a while. And so it had been 6 months of the market going down. And somehow it seemed like Sam was the guy who still had a giant pool of money, which suggested that he was the smartest guy in the room, that he had planned everything out, made a ton of money, got out at the right time, and, had money to spare.
So, again, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but a media darling at the time, a good Samaritan, a quote unquote JP Morgan stepping in to save the cryptocurrency markets, a man wanted in Washington to regale them with his rationality and his common senseness and his sort of unaffected folksiness. Did I get all that right?
I think so.
Okay. So what do you think started the sea change in opinion? Was it just the explosion that took place in November? Was there anything lurking under the surface, or was this just, okay, this is, again, Bernard Madoff, there were some people that were accusing of charlatanism, but most people were not. The mainstream people thought he was a decent guy until December of 2008 when he was exposed and arrested. Was that the same with Sam? How would you
Well, you have to look at Sam two different ways. So, you and I come at this thing kind of in opposite perspectives, I think, on some level, because, I've been a crypto reporter. I report from within the industry, and I've always kind of reported from the perspective of the industry, right? A little bit different than other crypto reporters. I sort of like take its viewpoint as granted as I report on it. Whereas, I think you come as like a more traditional guy who sort of like vibe with Sam because it looked like he sort of spoke your language a little bit. So I think on the outside, people like Sam because he sort of spoke the traditional finance language. He was skeptical of crypto. Within the crypto world, it's not a monolith, but folks had always been somewhat skeptical of Sam. And as you're getting later in 2022, that was all growing. I mean, people's two big problems with Sam, of those who had them, there was people who still thought he was a hero all along, even within the industry. But of those who had him, there's two big problems. Is one, he's running a centralized exchange, which most people, everyone uses them, but the idea is they're kind of a necessary evil. They're a stepping stone to the bright crypto decentralized future. It's not an endpoint. And two, he had kind of, acted in a fairly predatory fashion within the DeFi world, sort of like plowing millions or billions through there to sort of hover up as much value as he could. And so those things were causing people to not really love him because he wasn't really seen as like a good neighbor within crypto. And then just before FTX blew up, people got pretty mad at him because he seemed to be hogging all of the space in terms of deciding what the future of crypto would be in a legislative fashion. And a lot of folks didn't really like the vision he was articulating. Folks got pretty mad at him in October when he put out this big vision statement of what the law should be. And everyone assumed he had like the ear of all these members of Congress and he was going to define like what the next law was going to be. I think that was a little bit overblown, but there were a group of people who weren't crazy about him even before it all blew up. And then of course everything blew up and no one was crazy about him.
So I find the whole thing fascinating. Of course, he had that debate with the Bitcoin maximalist. You'll know
Eric Voorhees, yeah.
Eric Voorhees, and that didn't seem to go well. That was right after I had gotten back from the Middle East trip with him. Let's go to you for a second, Brady, if you don't mind. How did you come to cover crypto?
So I was a general technology reporter, and the way I always describe this to people is, I was writing about technology for the Observer, the former New York Observer, and I just always liked to write about anything that was weird. So robots, exoskeletons, machines that talk, and cryptocurrency. And I got into my origin story for getting interested in crypto is kind of funny. I got interested in crypto as I was interested in its potential as a way to manage intellectual property rights because I liked to write about ebooks. That was one of my favorite things to write about, like Kindles and things like that. And I realized that a Kindle could easily be a hardware wallet. And that was, it could be like a wallet for verifying ownership of a digital book or whatever. That was an interesting use case to me. So I dug into it. And then that kind of opened the door to me writing about all kinds of stuff. And then, CoinDesk recruited me because they liked some of the stuff that I was doing. And then once that happened in late 2017, I've been full-time crypto ever since then.
So I got to ask this if you don't mind, but you are a journalist. You don't have to answer. You have license here, Brady. You don't have to answer. But are you a disciple? Are you a crypto skeptic? Are you a crypto agnostic? Or are you a crypto believer? How would you describe yourself?
I guess I would put myself somewhere on the agnostic to believer end. I mean, I've always been pretty open about this. I'm in my 40s. I've always been interested in technology. I graduated high school without an email address. I remember people making fun of email. I remember people making fun of the internet. I remember people making fun of social media. And again and again and again, these new things came along and they all end up being hugely important. So like long before I ever got interested in crypto, I just sort of made the decision that when lots of smart techie types get excited about something, it may take a while, but it's probably going to work out. So that's just kind of been my viewpoint for a long time. And that's sort of how I look at cryptocurrency. That said, I'm happy to people get mad at me like they do any journalist for sort of reporting on the warts of the industry, because I'm happy to do that. Like, I'm not trying to like they call it FUD in crypto if you do anything negative. I'm happy to sling FUD. I think it's important for industries to be held accountable, but I don't look at it from the perspective of this stuff is all nonsense and it's going to go to zero eventually. That's not my approach. I don't know what's going to be important or how, but I do sort of think it's with us for the foreseeable.
I think it's well described what you're saying. I was a crypto skeptic. I was a traditional finance person. I became a little bit less skeptical after my very short stay in the White House when I learned that the Fed was talking about digitizing the dollar. I didn't make my first Bitcoin investment until October, November 2020. I think I bought one in October and several more in November, and then started scaling. But I had no idea who Sam Bankman-Fried was. I didn't meet Sam Bankman-Fried until June of 2021. When did Sam Bankman-Fried come across Brady Dale's radar screen? When did you first realize who he was and what he was doing and what his master plan was?
So Sam, he didn't come onto my radar until 2020 during DeFi summer. However, FTX had been on my radar before that. It was, as a journalist, you see things all the time that you're like, I should write about that at some point. The thing that I liked that FTX had is I worked with another reporter at CoinDesk at the time who would talk about FTX sometime, and I would go look at the website, and they had I hope this isn't inappropriate for me to say on your show, but they had a shitcoin index. They had you could invest in a bunch of crappy cryptocurrencies, and I thought that was a funny concept. And so it was one of those things that I kept meaning to write about, but never really got around to writing about it. And then in DeFi summer, which was this moment in which, sort of decentralized finance was getting very big on Ethereum. The first, and I talk about this in the book, the first one of those products to really pop was Compound, which is basically a money market, a lender's market on Ethereum. And they did this comp token. And Robert Leshner, the founder of Compound, introduced me to Sam because FTX was the first to list a futures market for the comp token, right after it came out. And I was doing any story that I could about comp because it was such a crazy time when it first came out in June of 2020. Yeah.
Did you get any vibe, let's say pre-November, any vibe of the Sam nefariousness?
Well, is it nefariousness? So okay. As you know from having at least read part of the book, that I sort of characterize myself much like you characterize yourself as sort of generally being pro Sam or sort of a Sam believer. And I think that is the most fair way to describe myself before everything blew up, which is not to say I didn't have any notes of skepticism about him. I think there were two things, but neither of these get you to the massive debacle that ultimately happened. But the two things that bothered me about Sam is, one, I didn't love the way he was sort of plowing through. So a little background for folks, which could be a little bit hard to follow. But during DeFi summer, this thing happened where people would spin up these new tokens and they would give them to people who tried out their different stuff. It was the easiest way to describe it. It was called liquidity mining or yield farming, whatever you want to call it. But basically the idea is they'd make these new tokens, which would theoretically have some value. And if you used their stuff and you had to put some money at risk to use it, you could get some of them, and it was a growth hack. It was a classic growth hack, right? But the idea was they were trying to do it. These tokens had a limited supply. They wanted people to be long-time shareholders, is what they were going for. But deep-pocketed investors like Alameda Research would just plow a ton of money in, hoover up as much of those coins as they could, and then just dump them, which completely wrecked the whole process of trying to build a basis of users, right? And Alameda would do this just really aggressively, right? And I understood why, because it was very clear to me at that point that Alameda didn't really care about the industry that they were in. They wanted to make as much money as they could so they could do their EA thing and save the world. That's why they were doing it. It kind of bugged me because it didn't seem to be in the best interest of the industry that they were in. But I also was just like, well, I don't know. It's capitalism. People can do things for whatever reason they want. So, but that sort of put me off. And then the other thing that also made me nervous about Sam, and this might be a point where you and I don't see things quite the same way, but he just clearly did not understand or buy into what I understand to be the value proposition of crypto. So like he would talk a lot about how it was problematic that blockchains were too slow and you couldn't rapidly get to millions and millions of users, right? And I got where he was coming from, but like I was just like the trade-offs that you want to make, if you make them, you might as well just not do blockchains. You know, it's just like, and so it just seemed to me like he was sort of fundamentally out of sync with the whole space. And I sort of wondered about his long-term viability based on that. But I still, you know, on the day that FTX blew up, I was in somewhat of denial that day, not because I was so invested in Sam, but just because he just seemed smarter than that. You know, it's just like, I just didn't think he'd do something that dumb, you know?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, he did say, I mean, I have a hindsight test, obviously, where I see the world 2020, yeah. Or sometimes I tell people hindsight's not 2020, Brady. It's 2010. We see better reflecting backwards than we do forwards, you know. And he said something to me, you know, now upon reflection, he said something to me that should have been more troublesome. And this is, I guess, one of my shortcomings. He said, well, I don't really care about crypto. This is a money-making arbitrage opportunity. So there was no, and I'm not saying he needed to be a Michael Saylor-like evangelist, but it just felt like it was probably higher level opportunism than really what I'm hoping long-term will be the use cases for crypto, which is a delayering of transactions and making transactions more efficient, more time efficient, but also more accurate, more secure. Yeah. Those are the real hopes.
Well, and right, and to your point, how are you going to be the Mark Zuckerberg or whatever of crypto if you don't buy into, you know, like Mark Zuckerberg was never going to be Mark Zuckerberg. Right. If he didn't think social media was a good idea. You know, like if he thought social media was a hustle, he wasn't going to be the guy who made it huge. You know.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. It's the reason why I'm bringing it up. It doesn't reflect well on me because I'm now using a hindsight test to see that. But I think you bring it up in your book, and I think it's really worthwhile. I think it's worth sharing with your readers and my listeners. You say a couple of things about Sam, which made me laugh. I'm going to read them to you if you don't mind. One is your subtitle: "Crypto's Very Bad Good Guy." You also call him a geek with swagger, which is a little like jumbo shrimp, right? There's a little bit of an oxymoron going there. And then you said something about him, which turned out to be very true, actually, that there was some fame addiction there where he was addicted to the attention. So handle all three of those. Let's start with crypto's very bad good guy. What do you mean there?
Yeah, well, so it's kind of meant to be a double entendre. You know, Sam's whole thing was he was going to save the world, right? Like he was the smartest guy in the room. He's going to make a pile of money, and he was going to deploy that money he was going to do more good per dollar than anyone had ever done before. You know, like that was his big vision. And so he was meant to be this good guy. So it turns out, though, he did some good. I mean, he definitely, you know, spread some money around, but he ended up losing people a lot more money than that in the end. So he was very bad at being a good guy. Or the other way, the other side of the entendre is he was a very bad guy pretending to be a good guy. So like he ultimately had, you know, very poor ethics, but was presenting himself as a good guy. So it's kind of like which way, and it's open to the reader to interpret it. Like, which way do you think he was? Was he just bad at being good, or was he actually bad and pretending to be good? You know, and I don't really have a super clear answer on that myself. That's sort of what I want people to think through as they read the book. I think the one big thing I will say about it is I have never been a huge fan of self-righteousness, even though before I was a journalist, I was a professional activist, but still, you know, super intense. Like I know what's right for the world.
Yeah, it's your opinion. You're not derogatory to other people that have a different opinion than you. You're just evangelizing your opinion. No, I do know that we have a lot of self-righteous and we have a lot of scolds in our population now. If you're not admitting the same level of the carbon that they're admitting, you're a bad guy. They're a good guy. P.S. We're both admitting carbon. Right. So I don't understand.
Well, but my point there on Sam is I feel like I feel like he was able to do more harm because he convinced himself it was okay because he was ultimately going to do so much good. That's the danger of the self-righteousness there. And
Yeah.
that's what I think is particularly alarming.
You help me see a lot of things, and so I just want to address them with you. People often ask me, did I think that this was a nefarious plan from the start? Meaning, did he have a piggy bank known as Alameda? He was perhaps processing trades and taking advantage of volatility and arbitrage in the situation. And then he said, hey, maybe I need more rocket fuel. Let me set up this FTX thing. I'll make it my own personal piggy bank. Um, you got me across that finish line, by the way. I think it was malfeasance from the start. What say you? I'll tell you why you got me over the finish line in a second, but I want to hear your thoughts.
Well, uh, I mean, I think it was always meant to be a way to make as much money as possible. That said, I still think he wanted to make the money to like cure malaria and whatever. I mean, that's always, I always think cure malaria. I don't know, I really know that was his top goal, but like, I think he did, and I think he thought he could actually do it in a way where his customers would also make money. I don't think he ever thought a hole would be discovered. But yeah, I think it's pretty clear that he was willing to like take that big risk. He was willing to take outsized risks to like do this massive amount of good all along.
Yeah, so that's my theory, right? He had a little bit of a god complex. He said, "No problem. I'm going to borrow Brady and Anthony's money. I'm going to take it out of their accounts, put it in my accounts. Of course, it's temporary. I'm such a genius, and I have a little bit of a god complex. I'm going to get everything right with my trading. I'm going to make myself tens of billions of dollars, which is going to be used as fuel to save the world. And then at the appropriate time, very ethically, with no criminal intent, I'm going to take Brady's money and Anthony's money and put it back in their accounts. And it'll have always been safekeeping. But since I can't do it technically because of the way the terms of service are, I'm going to break these rules. But it's okay. It's not a big deal because it's me. I'm a god, and I'm a god complex person. I'll get my 3 or 4 cohorts to help me build a backdoor software program. I'm going to break these rules. Entrepreneurs have to break rules, but I'm a great guy. Money's going for a good cause. I drive in a Corolla. I don't really care about my hair or makeup or hair products, and I'm going to get Brady and Anthony his money back.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Do I got it? Is that it?
Yeah, and I think it my take, yeah, completely squares with yours is I think it becomes easier for you to justify to yourself taking those kinds of risks if you're not buying yourself gold-plated airplanes, but you're creating opportunities for people in the developing world. That's your long-term vision, right? So it becomes easier to justify that.
Is he gonna win that argument in court?
I don't think so. I don't think they care why you stole money. I don't.
Yeah, right. There's a strict liability. Remember, there's criminal intent. There's something called mens rea. It's criminal intent. I have the intent to defraud or steal from you, but there's also a strict liability test, meaning if I cross the threshold, if I reach into your bank account and take your money and put it in my bank account, even if I was in my own mind going to return it to you someday, doesn't matter. That's a criminal act, and that's quite punishable. He has used the effed up term a lot. You write about it. It's fun part of your writing. Fond of saying that I effed up. What do you make of that? What do you make of that sort of like? I'm not going to say it's adolescent, but I'm going to say it's gamification. It's almost like dispassionate objectification of human beings. I blew through $8 or $9 billion of your money, and so I misplayed the game Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know. Do I have that wrong?
No, I think that's right. I do think it was intentional.
What does that say about his personality when he's writing that?
Yeah, to me, one of the strongest images of the Sam story, and I encourage people who find this moment interesting to go back and look at it. It's easy to do. Is to go look at his interview that he did with the New York Times with Aaron Ross Sorkin, and kind of his body language and his affect in that interview, because it's very much. I got irritated to some level during the discussion of Sam's blow up, with how much focus there was on, you know, him being a son and a young man and things like that, because he's a 30-year-old guy and like whatever. But if you look at that interview with Aaron Ross Sorkin, he's like hunched down. He's acting like a kid who got in trouble in the principal's office. You know, like the good kid who everyone knows is always good, and then made, you know, one mistake and can't believe he was ever in the principal's office. And I think that was sort of the vibe he was trying to get off. And I think that's sort of the same thing he was doing with that whole effed up language. And keep in mind, that was all, you know, when he was doing that the most was before he had gotten arrested. I think he still thought there was some chance that in the court of the public opinion, he could win this argument and convince everyone it was just a big mistake and he could get past it. But yeah, I do think it was strategic. He was trying to appeal to people's thinking that, you know, mistakes happen, and he had just made one.
I think it's so well said. You also dedicate the book to Michael Lewis, and so I want to give you my quick Michael Lewis story. You know, I did the Crypto Bahamas event with Sam. I had Michael Lewis at our table. We had we had President Bill Clinton, Prime Minister Tony Blair there. We also had Governor Terry McAuliffe from Virginia, Orlando Bloom. It was a who's who of people, Prime Minister of the Bahamas. I think Michael was smitten with Sam. And I saw Michael at the Bitcoin conference last week and had an opportunity to hear his presentation. I think Michael bought hook, line, and sinker into Sam. And by the way, I'm not judging that, because guess who also did that? I did that as well. So again, no, I'm not throwing any rocks, and I'm in a glass house. But he did say something to me that I think he changed his mind on. He said that if he thought Sam was nefarious, he wasn't going to write a book. And when it became out that Sam is nefarious, he decided to write the book anyway. And I don't blame him for that, because it's such an interesting human story. You know, your book, his book, these books are very readable and they're very Shakespearean. But I guess, why did you dedicate the book to Michael? And what do you think how do you think your book is going to differentiate from the eventual Michael Lewis book?
It'll be wildly different. So I dedicated it to him for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, you know, this is my first book, and I'm going up against the greatest writer of our generation, you know, like, and I knew that going into it. So it was just like, I wanted to acknowledge it. And obviously I've admired the guy for years. I've read most of his books. You know, he's great. I also, having read the book, it at least tries to be a fairly funny book. And I wanted to do that, you know, going into it. I mean, it isn't like a Dave Sedaris book or anything, but I'm pretty light in a variety of times throughout it. And I thought that was kind of a funny way to open, is to sort of open up with an unusual move like that, so people would kind of know what they were getting into. But I do genuinely admire the guy. You know, he's so great at setting a scene and like taking you through history and sort of bringing people alive. And I think that's what his book is going to do. You know, he's going to introduce a bunch of characters. You're going to see them. You're going to breathe the air that they were in the Bahamas as he was talking to them. You know, that's the kind of thing he is going to be able to do. I wasn't able to do any of that. I wrote the book in way less time during a period in which nobody wanted to talk about FTX. Nobody wanted to be associated with it. You know, it was very hard to get sources to speak with me. But I think what I'm able to deliver, hopefully better than I'm guessing Michael Lewis will be able to, is the larger story that Sam found himself in, and the sort of the mechanics of this very weird world, and how he was able to take advantage of it, and why he saw an unusual arbitrage opportunity in this space. And I also think I have a feeling that even for all of Michael, we'll see. I mean, I'm sure he'll write a great book, or has written a great book, but I think I do get the sort of effective altruism viewpoint better than most people do. And so that's a big undercurrent of.
Well, give me your viewpoint on effective altruism. You like it? You think it's BS and virtue signaling?
I think EA people are great. I have the same stance on EA as I do as almost any, you know, a big theme of this book is the philosophical element of cryptocurrency and the importance of that element. And a part of what makes this story interesting to me is most cryptocurrency philosophical battles are just coins versus coins. Sam brings in this whole separate philosophy that usually doesn't have much to do with it, of EA, and it's sort of that stew created chaos. You know, my thinking on almost any philosophical viewpoint is they're all useful tools, and they're all terrible if you take them all the way. Like, they are all horrible at an extreme, and I think Sam was an extreme of EA. And so I no more think that Sam's extremity on EA should reflect on EA than the fact that most hardcore Bitcoiners that you meet aren't very fun to hang out with at parties. That's just a reality of intense Bitcoin people. That doesn't mean that Bitcoin is bad. I think Bitcoin's great. I also find a lot of Bitcoin people super annoying to talk to. So I think it's similarly, when I was hanging out with EA people, which I did for a while in 2019 before I even knew who Sam was, they made me feel like I should be a better person, that I should be doing more in the world, that I should be a better citizen.
Yeah, look, I think Sam has jaded me a little bit on it. Maybe I need to get myself up to speed on it. I'm glad I asked the question. So I'm at the part of our podcast where I come up with 5 words. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to any of our podcasts. I'm going to read you 5 words, Brady, and then I need you to react to them. You could be a 1 sentence, 10 sentence, a 1 word. It's just sort of, I'm going to say it. You react. Caroline Ellison.
Over-indexed.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly? Help me.
I think Caroline and all the other people, I think they're all good, interesting, useful people in the world. But I think really this is ultimately a story of Sam. And I think people are a little bit too fixated on the fact that, he was a coworker with his girlfriend. That might be kind of weird, but I don't think it really explains much of the many billions of dollars that were lost. I think this is really a Sam story, not a Sam and Caroline story.
Okay. Gary Wang.
Basically the same answer. I would like to know, I guess, but he's just a little more mysterious. I would like to know more about Gary. I don't understand if Gary was a crazy technical genius or was just simply a genius for getting Sam what he wanted built, which I think it might have been more the latter, but I don't know. But Gary's a mysterious, nobody knows too much about Gary, including me.
So maybe let me phrase it this way. Gary, guilty. Caroline Ellison, guilty. Nishad, the tech guy, guilty. So we have 3 of Sam's closest cohorts have all pleaded guilty. Are they guilty and over-indexed? Are they guilty and have smoking guns in their hands? Or do they have the evidence and resources to put Sam away for a long time?
If that's the question, sure. If Sam did a bunch of wrong things, they did it too. This is why I describe Sam as a geek with swagger. We were talking about that before. This guy had enough charisma to persuade Gary Wang to leave his high-paying tech job and just come work with him to start up this hedge fund in the Bay Area. They did things at his behest that they shouldn't have done. So if the question is, do I think that, a court will probably condemn them as well? Sure, of course. When you're in the members of Billy the Kid's gang were still guilty, even though Billy was the leader. But it's still it is still fundamentally a Billy the Kid story, just like this is fundamentally a Sam Bankman-Fried story. I don't tend to think about things in legal fashions too much. I think about them in terms of big narratives. And so in terms of the big narrative, this isn't a story of a bunch of geniuses coming up with some conspiracy together that ultimately led to lots of people losing billions of dollars. This is a story of kind of one big personality who persuaded a number of other smart people to do his bidding.
All right, I'm going to keep going. Okay, we went to Caroline Ellison, Gary Wang, CZ, founder of Binance.
Oh man, kingpin, and father figure. I think in so many ways, Sam was emulating CZ, and I don't know if people called him SBF before he got into crypto. But I don't think it's any accident that Sam really liked being known by a series of initials, just like CZ was known by a series of initials. FTX launches a token, just as Binance launched a token. FTX was sort of like wandering around the world, sort of know exactly home location, much like Binance did. And I think Sam was 100% targeting. I think the reason they took the big swings that they took in 2020 or in 2022 really is because he thought he had a chance, if they made a lot of money, that they could overtake Binance eventually, was what they thought he had to do. I think maybe arch enemy is sort of the best, but
Yeah, there was a rivalry there. There was a fraternal rivalry. Obviously, CZ helped him get the business
yep.
started. Listen, I was at the inception point of the last transactions, meaning the Sam was speaking about CZ in a way that I never would have in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, which led to CZ unwinding his FTT
Mm-hmm.
token. But make no mistake, CZ did not put Sam out of business. If Sam was running a legitimate business and he had the capital that he was telling people he had, he would have been able to have met that sale easily, and things would have progressed. And he would have been well served back in May of 2022 to have said, "Hey, lost the money at Alameda. I'm shutting Alameda down and just focus on FTX." He still would have been fine, but he couldn't do those things. There was too much wrapped in there. You wrote this beautiful book, SBF, how the FTX bankruptcy unwound crypto's very bad good guy. And you wrote a book that helped me learn a lot more about the situation away from my own facts, but the facts that I had on the ground. It was clear to me that Sam had something out for CZ. And he was, not just the nastiness on Twitter, but he was telling regulators in Abu Dhabi and Dubai that, CZ was not to be trusted. And so the weird thing happened is he ended up being the one that got knocked out of the game. The other thing Sam did, another weird thing, he said, "Well played." I don't know if you remember that on Twitter, but it's not a game. You've got real people's lives and money at stake. You can't say well played. It's just too disassociative. But I ran into CZ in San Moritz in January. So January 2023, I went to the CFC San Moritz conference. We had a chance to break some bread together at dinner, and I actually thanked him. I thanked him for the exposure because I was in the process of introducing Sam to some of the biggest investors in the world, which included the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the president of the UAE, and who knows, maybe they would have invested their money and that would have been very damaging for me and my business. Not that Sam didn't already hurt me. He certainly did, but it's less damaging when some of your closest friends don't put any money in, or it's
Mm-hmm.
the exposure happens before the money goes in. Got two last words for you, if you don't mind. DeFi, the concept of DeFi, and let me ask a little bit of an addendum. Is DeFi won?
What do you mean? Is it one thing or has it won?
Is it? Yeah, is it going to
Oh.
win? So the concept of DeFi, and is DeFi going to win, or are we going to be in a TradeFi world with a tiny bit of DeFi?
I think we're going to be in a TradeFi world and a DeFi world. I think the way that technology usually
Okay,
works
that's a
out
good answer.
is it finds new corners and new interesting things for itself to do. So I think both will exist. I think we'll be surprised in 10 years how we're using DeFi. Just like when the internet started, I remember the first time I heard about Twitter, like, why would you write only 140 characters when you can do a blog that gives you as much space as you want? That sounds dumb, but like that worked out. The technology is surprising. So I think DeFi will win. I think one of the most important things for people to understand, I think coming out of this whole story is people see Sam as a condemnation of crypto. But the truth is, the truly decentralized things, the truly decentralized entities through the Sam story did pretty well. So for example, there were a bunch of lenders who were entirely DeFi lenders. We know that all the centralized lenders like BlockFi and Celsius and all of them went under. The DeFi lenders were fine. They had, there were some liquidations, some people, but they were never insolvent, And so, so I think DeFi will be fine. I think it has a bright future. Do I think that means they'll barrel over Goldman Sachs? I wouldn't make that call, but I think it'll be with us for the foreseeable.
It's really well said. Last word of my 5 words, Brady. Sam Bankman-Fried, SBF.
Yeah, the big word for me, the big thought for me on Sam, I guess the big red flag of Sam is just really, honestly, beware the good guy, beware self-righteousness, because it has many times. I made a comment about Fidel Castro in the book. I think Fidel
I remember.
started with some real idealism, but like
Right.
believing you're more right than everyone else can lead to really dark places eventually. So I guess that's my big thought
Yeah.
on Sam.
Yeah. I think, and there's also a cautionary tale in your book. This can and likely will happen again. It's not just Charles Ponzi, and it's not just Bernie Madoff and Sam Bankman-Fried and the woman Elizabeth Holmes that ran Theranos. Unfortunately, this is something that we will live with, and it will, in Madoff's case, he was one of the most regulated people on the planet, still was able to commit a 3-decade plus fraud. So we're going to be living with this. What's next for you?
I'll be at Axios. I write this Axios crypto newsletter every day. I would love for folks to check that out. I write it with my co-writer Crystal Kim. I would love to do more books.
So what do? They go to axios.com and look for your
Search for
newsletter?
Axios Crypto and sign up for it. We'd love to have them there. And hopefully I'll end up doing some more books on some more topics. We may do a paperback with some more about the trial if people like this one. So we'll see.
All right. Well, listen, congratulations to you. I loved reading what I read, but I had one eye closed in certain sections. I was wincing, and it was quite traumatic.
Read the conclusion if you
SPF.
haven't yet. The conclusion
I'm
closes
sorry?
with some big thoughts, which you may find.
No, I read
Oh, okay,
that.
cool.
I mean, yes, that's what. Yes, I'm talking about your belief system about what happens and how people. Your book is not only just about Sam, in my mind. The reason why I wanted to bring you on, your book is about human nature, and your book is about certain types of people. It's almost like a cautionary handbook with a real life example that is quite contemporary for all
Thank
of
you.
us, and that's what I think makes your book so interesting. Yeah, and I don't want to give away the end of your book, but that's more or less the gist of what you're saying to people. Well, God bless you. Great book. I look forward to reading your blog on Axios. And thank you so much for joining us today on Open.
The most important thing is to do your preparation. Tucker Carlson, in his interview, he was very focused on a very small audience in America. Putin slapped him around, if you remember. And he didn't do that with me because I took advice. I did my preparation and treated him with a degree of respect.
But I think the difference between you and him is you weren't intimidated. You could see that he was back here. You're working for the FT and you're carrying the august institution of the FT on your back. So you have a responsibility to be more discerning with somebody like President Putin.
Very important to have that combination when you're talking. I do drop a lot of names. I interviewed a lot of world leaders, and you shouldn't be arrogant. You got to be respectful, but you cannot afford to be intimidated because Trump, Putin, they smell weakness and they take advantage of it.
Okay, welcome to Open Book. I am your host, Anthony Scaramucci. Joining us now is Lionel Barber. Lionel was the former editor-in-chief of the Financial Times. He's wrote 2 extraordinary books. I want to hold this one up. It's in that pink salmon color, The Powerful and the Damned, Private Diaries in Turbulent Times, an awesome book. And a newer book, Gambling Man, The Wild Ride of Japan's Masayoshi-san. And so we're going to do a 2-for-1 special here, Mr. Barber. Very grateful for you joining us. We're sort of having a home and away. I did your podcast in London a few weeks ago, which I greatly enjoyed. And one of the promises I make to our authors, I read these books so that I can ask the questions from a reader's perspective, not just from somebody that gets like a briefing. So I want to go to your career, by the way, which I found to be remarkable as I traced it back. Let's go back to 1978. And of course, there was an article in the Financial Times this weekend, okay, when you were working for the Scotsman, okay? And so let's go to 1978. How do we go from the Scotsman to becoming editor-in-chief of a century-and-a-half-old news organization, the Financial Times?
Oh, Anthony, a confession to straight up. It was the only job I was offered in journalism. All the other people turned me down. So I thought, well, I'm going to take the Scotsman. I've never been to Scotland. And it wasn't that easy in England to be an Englishman in Scotland because they had a referendum just to have their own parliament back in 79. And so I arrived, and and I had a lot to learn. Well, then I got lucky because a series of articles I wrote, actually, I went to Poland, and the uprising and the fall of the government was one of the first cracks in the communism. And I got the Young Journalist of the Year in Britain in 1981. So the Sunday Times, Rupert Murdoch's paper, he just bought those papers. They gave me a job as a business correspondent. And I think that was probably the beginnings of a career. But I did have to get knocked into shape.
Let's talk about journalism for a second. I find journalists, for me, it's sort of a calling. If you haven't figured me out yet, Lionel, I'm a closet journalist. I read everything. I've got subscriptions to every newspaper and every news magazine, and I follow journalism with great detail. I got in trouble with Donald Trump for writing an op-ed that the free press is not the enemy of the people. So I'm a closet journalist, but my passion's more for money management. But you, based on this book, The Powerful and the Damned, are a real journalist. So talk about the passion and the calling to becoming a journalist.
Well, I got it from my father, who left school at 15. I'm not going to say I came from a poor background, but I came from a modest background. And my father came from the north of England. He didn't go to college. And so he taught us, Anthony, to read books and newspapers. And you're a great reader. I had to learn how to be a big reader from my father. And I thought I'm pretty good at storytelling, and I admire him. I don't think I'm ever going to be as good as my father, who went on to work at the BBC. But he always made the point that journalism is not a profession, it's a vocation. And he always said to me, if you want to earn money, you're in the wrong job. It's a vocation. You've really got to be passionate about it.
So very true. So this book, this is a 35-year book, I guess. This is
actually, Anthony, it's just the time I was editor.
No. I see that. I know it's 2005 to 2020, but to me,
I see.
There's 35 years of experience in this book. I know it's a diary for those 15 years, but I find that the Masayoshi-san book is a different book. I feel like this is somebody, by your own words in the book, is not well known. I think you described him in the book as probably the most consequential investor that people know the least about. And I'll just tell my own personal story. I was with him at a New York Mets Chicago Cubs game 25 years ago in the Tokyo Dome. And I had gotten invited by Mark Schwartz, who was running Goldman Sachs's Tokyo division. He was the CEO of Goldman Tokyo. And I was a guest because I was friends with Bobby Valentine. Sitting next to me was a guy named Masayoshi-san. I had no idea. I had no idea who he was. It's probably embarrassing to admit that to you because at that time he was internet famous, as you point out in the book, his rise. And he was just a very humble, very soft-spoken, felt like he was just like a diligent guy. And so why don't people know who he is? Here is this consequential investor with hundreds of billions of dollars of scale.
Well, he's from Japan, and although he speaks fluent English because he did go to college at Berkeley and spent 6 years, he left Japan age 15, very unusually, and he's to learn English and to get that American experience. But he's also somebody who's under the radar. I mean, we can talk about why he's suddenly been big in the limelight with Donald Trump recently with his AI investments. But back then, he was soft-spoken. He was under the radar. And he was probably even more soft-spoken when he spoke to you in the stadium, because in 2000, he just lost 97% of his paper fortune with the dot-com bust.
It was on the way down. So it was, just to set the scene for you, sir, it was March of 2020, and it was right before the implosion of the NASDAQ bubble, which, as you point out in the book, would have destroyed most people, but he stayed on message. So where does he get this grit from?
I think it's because he's an outsider in Japan. He's Korean Japanese. And if you're Korean Japanese in Japan, you're not going to go to become a school teacher or a banker or a politician. You're basically a nobody. You're discriminated against. And remember, Anthony, he had to live under an alias like most Korean Japanese. His name was Yasumoto because the family didn't want to show that they were actually Korean. So I think being an outsider, watching his father, who was into pachinko slot machines, he had before been a loan shark, and he was selling moonshine as a kid. But his father got rich on slot machine gambling called pachinko. And in pachinko, you can make a lot of money and you can lose a lot of money. And I think he learned the hustle from his dad.
I've had my share of pachinko losings while I've been in Tokyo, so I have great sympathy for that. But for me, there's one exchange in this. I don't want to give the whole book away, but I just think it's a phenomenal book about understanding entrepreneurship, Asian-based entrepreneurship. I think you delved into this, frankly, because you were an Englishman as an outsider in Scotland. Here is a Korean in Japan as an outsider, taking risks. I want all that 35, 40 years of journalism into the following question. Ready? What was the most powerful exchange between the two of you? You had access to him, and you had several interviews with him. What was the one interview where the apple hit you on the side of the head and said, "Whoa, this guy's a different beast than the other guys"?
Well, it was the first interview. I'd gone to Tokyo the first time, and he said he was too busy. I think he was actually not that well. It was just after COVID, and he's a very elusive man. And I finally had gone out to see his home, and I went into this meeting, and I'd done my homework, and I asked him what it was like growing up as a kid. And he described how he'd grown up on the edge of this shanty town and been with his grandmother, and there were just pigs around the grandmother's house. And he told me with tears in his eyes that as a kid, he had constant nightmares. And even as a young man, the stench of the pig feces, the excrement in his nostrils, that was a recurring memory nightmare of where he came from and which he can never forget. And I have to say, that was a very powerful moment. You couldn't make that up.
Well, I love that story. I think there was something about it. When I closed that book before I started I read that one first, by the way. When I closed that book, I always try to take one or two things away from a book that I'm reading. When I closed that book, to me, it was his resilience. And I think what marked his resilience is that he really doesn't care, meaning that I'm going to lose 90% of my money, 97% of my money, no problem. I'm getting up tomorrow. Let's go at it again. And I think he has built a reputation institutionally. I think you interviewed one of my friends, Marcelo Clar, for the book.
Yes.
And I had dinner once with Marcelo, who said to me, the one thing about Masayoshi, he does not stop. And I've got a lot of young people that listen to this podcast, and it's a big lesson for people. You can get knocked down, as he did in March of 2020 into June of 2020, and look at where he is today. And I think that's a big lesson for people, that there are second, third, possibly fourth acts in your life. Just keep moving. All right, so I'm going to switch abruptly now to this one. And this one really touched me, sir, because I thought, and I've recommended this now to several of my journalist friends. You should read Lionel's book, because you went through Brexit, the tech boom, the global financial crisis, and the rise of fake news. That was your tenure, basically, at the FT from those years. So looking back, I have a guess for myself, but what is the toughest editorial call that you had to make in the 15 years?
Oh, God, there were quite a few. One strategic call was to say, even though we've had the shock of the global financial crisis, we should not write off capitalism. we may need some changes, but what we must not do is lose all faith in capitalism. And I have to say, my predecessor made that mistake after the dot-com boom, because I wouldn't have got the job if, I was in New York and they decided to make a change in the editorship. And that's how I got that job. And I think I had that in mind. I think on Brexit, hands up, Anthony, we got that wrong. I made the call that based on rational economic argument, the Brits would vote for Brexit. I didn't let that color the news reporting, but I kept in the back of my mind thinking, I'm worried that the whole paper is so, pro-Remain that Britain should remain in the European Union. We may be missing something. So I would say that was a tough call, and I don't think I got it completely right. What do you think? What do you think?
It's interesting because I really thought the digital advancement, I felt you got that right, meaning you pushed the FT in your tenure to switch it up. I mean, you were, frankly, in my mind, ahead of the New York Times in terms of you went full hog into digital advancement. I can remember late 2005 subscribing to FT Digital, and it was incredibly robust. And I think that that's something that you're not giving yourself enough credit for, because it sustained the FT in a way that it may not have been sustained just from the broadsheet paper. So I give you a lot of, that was bold. I guess the one thing I would tease you about is there's one section in the book where you're not upgrading the hard top computers in your New York office. Okay, I caught that. I was like, whoa, that's impressive, because I'm always so anxious about that. I'm talking to you from a brand new laptop, Lionel Barber. I just want to make sure you know that, because I'm always nervous that I'm going to miss something or something will glitch on me. But also your insight. I really feel you've got very good insight. You have a wide aperture into human beings. So what writings, what experiences do you draw from? Your insight into Blair, your discussion of Putin when you met him in the embassy, and of course various assortment of other people. You've gone from Riyadh and the Royal Palace to Trump Tower to the Kremlin and back. So what are you drawing on when you make these judgments? Wow. I feel like I got a very good scouting report on a lot of people in this book.
Yeah, I would single out the Putin interview with Vladimir Putin in 2019 in June, because it took 5 years. I wasn't begging for it. They offered several times to have an interview with somebody else, or they wanted to do it one way, and I said no, it should be just the FT, me leading. I'll take the correspondent, obviously, but I waited for more than 5 years for that. And the most important thing is to do your preparation. This is a podcast is not where you take shots at other people, but I would just say that I don't think Tucker Carlson in his interview did enough preparation. He was very focused on a very small audience in America, and Putin slapped him around, if you remember, and said, I thought you were going to do a serious interview, but you're just some kind of talk show host. And he didn't do that with me, because I took advice. I did my preparation. And treated him.
I think, not to interrupt you, sir, but I think the difference between you and him is you weren't intimidated.
Well,
I think Tucker. I mean, again, I know Tucker a long time. Worked with him at Fox News.
Yeah,
I think he was intimidated. You could see that he was back here.
You can't do that.
You're working for the FT and you're carrying the august institution of the FT on your back into the interview. And so you have a responsibility to be more discerning with somebody like President Putin. But
it's very important to do that, have that combination when you're talking. And this book is, I drop a lot of names. I interviewed a lot of world leaders and people, top people on Wall Street, like, Jamie Dimon a number of times, and Lloyd Blankfein, your old colleagues at Goldman. I mean, you shouldn't be arrogant. You got to be respectful, but you cannot afford to be intimidated, because Trump, Putin, they smell weakness and they take advantage of it.
No question. I mean, that's something I've always, I had these conversations with my friend Mark Carney, who's now the Prime Minister of Canada, about this, particularly with President Trump. I love this book. It was raw. It was immediate. There were fresh accounts, but it made me question something that I was dying to ask you, which is what entries did not make the book? Is there something you could share with us? Say, whoa, it's a little bit too much. Maybe I got to leave it out of this beautiful book.
Well, an awful lot went in. I think there were one or two exchanges, and I do need to tread here a little bit because I wasn't spending all my time with the intelligence community. But, you know, occasionally, once a year or so, you'd go for lunch at MI6 and talk to the spy master. And those conversations I did not report in the book because I think they were so, you know, they were totally off the record. And I don't think they were that revealing compared to others, but that didn't make it. I think what would be other things, maybe one or two conversations with the proprietor. And certainly, Anthony, I did not dump on my colleagues. You know, there were some interchanges, obviously, where there were difficult conversations where you have to make a big decision about somebody. That didn't go in the book.
No, that wasn't this book. This book was, here are my observations as a global traveler and as a journalist, someone that has great, insatiable intellectual curiosity. Here are my observations of what went on during my tenure and also decisions. And I think you were very fair in the book of decisions that you made right and some things you could have done better or differently, which is every business executive. There's no executive, whether it's Warren Buffett, Jamie Dimon, Lloyd Blankfein, who's a close friend of mine. Nobody can be perfect with their decisions. And by the way, you wouldn't have time, Lionel Barber, for all the bad mistakes I've made. Okay, I've got phone books of mistakes about my life. So, but I one last question that I want to turn to my favorite part of our podcast, where I list out 5 words. I get my my author to respond to the 5 words, but it's more of an existential question. I found the book to be hopeful. I found the book to be, I think we're in a media morass right now. We've got tribalism. We have ethnic distinctions and stereotyping that's going on. Tribalism and polarity in the United Kingdom. That would be true here in the U.S. And probably most of the Western world has some elements of this. But I found the book to be hopeful because I found that most of the people that you're writing about, whatever their flaws are, at least Western leaders and Western business executives, are generally well-intentioned. Do I have that wrong, or is that something I shouldn't be taking away from this book?
No, I'm going to butter your biscuits here, Anthony. You're dead right. I'm so glad you noticed that. I think with experience and some maturity, you become a little bit more understanding that maybe people aren't always totally cynical. They are trying to do the right thing, but they're human beings and they make mistakes. I'm hopeful because I genuinely believe there is room for serious journalism and for reliable, trustworthy information. And I think, and I say this in the book, there are such things as facts. They're very important. I should have said the toughest call I made was on the Wirecard investigation, that huge German fraud, as big as Enron. I mean, I lived that story for a year and we got them in the end. They were fraudsters. And we showed the importance of that story, Anthony, for all people in finance and business. Was there was a fraud, a newspaper exposed it. Facts are facts.
No question. I appreciate that, but I found the book to be remarkably uplifting, and I admire you a great deal for writing it. So we're down to the 5 words. So how this goes down with my other authors is I'm going to say the word. You give me a sentence or two, okay? And so I'm going to start with the word power. I say power. You say what?
I say palace. I look at the room where the person of power is, and I study everything in that room to try, because power reflects character. Then the second point would be it's changed, hasn't it? There are people, there are always new sources of power, people that you've never thought of, like Elon Musk, who's suddenly the most powerful person in the world in terms of money. So defining power and the relationship that an editor has with power, I'm giving you far too long an answer.
No, it's good. It's good. But also,
I'll be
power
more
is
succinct.
also unpredictable, though, by the way.
Very true.
Unpredictable. I don't think any of us, myself included, you know who didn't predict Donald Trump's first electoral victory? That would be Donald Trump. I was with him the evening of the. He was like, "What are you doing tomorrow?" He was heading to Scotland to go play golf. That was his plans on November the 9th, and it got detoured by his electoral success. So power sometimes can also be unpredictable. If I say the word journalism, sir, what do you say?
The truth, the search for the truth, based on facts.
Well said. Which is why I'm intrigued by journalists. Masayoshi's son.
Man of mystery, outsider, massive gambler, who's just more resilient than a gummy ball.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I got that from him, and that was a big part of that book. I'm like, got to stay in things no matter what's happening around you. If I say the FT, the Financial Times, the Pink Palace,
the world's leading business newspaper, with great deference to the Journal, but based in the city of London, a vital part of public discourse and a source of trustworthy journalism. It's now been going more than 130 years. Under new ownership with the Japanese, hasn't changed.
Well, you mentioned the intelligence services. When I got my first presidential daily brief, I asked the analyst where he was reading. I said to the CIA, so a lot of the information is coming in very tribal and very slanted. And he said, and I'll just share this with you, he said he reads the English version of the Le Monde, which is the Parisian paper, because he says, Anthony, they don't care about us. So they report politics pretty objectively. And he read the FT for an overall survey of the business landscape in the world, because he felt that was the most impartial of the papers out there that were covering that. So I share that with you.
Bob Rubin said the same thing.
Last word, and I'll give you the last word. Lionel Barber. I say the word Lionel Barber, the two words, and you say what?
There's life after the FT.
Yeah, it's been good for you, right? You've been enjoying it. Yeah?
I've been enjoying it. I have, family, and my two kids are in the States. I think of my first name, Franklin. My father named me after Franklin Roosevelt. I wish I could have kept that name, but people kept calling me Frankie. So that's why it's Lionel Barber.
All right. Well, there you go. I love it. Thank you so much for joining us on Open Book. There are two books here. The first one is Gambling Man, about the life of Masayoshi-san. And the second book is The Powerful and the Damned, which is a diary. It's a private diaries in turbulent times of the Financial Times 2005 to 2020. Mr. Lionel Barber, thank you so much for joining us on Open Book.
It's been a huge pleasure, Anthony. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.